record on this computer. All right, internets, we are live on Facebook and also recording for those who are out there today. We have Shariq Abdul Ghani from the Minaret Foundation. Shariq, assalamu alaikum, man. Welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum salam. Blessings to all who are watching.
Yeah, man. So, I found out about your organization maybe around this. I was in Houston in September. Around that time, I found out some of the work you're doing. If I would name it correctly, you are a multi-faith civic organization. Did I say that right?
Yeah, our focus is multi-faith and civic engagement for the Muslim community.
Okay. So it's kind of like Muslim centered, but you have outreach too, would you say? Is that?
Yeah, no, it's definitely it's work on behalf of the Muslim community. That's a good question.
Okay.
It's work on behalf of the Muslim community. It's building relationships. You go to our website, it says it all over the place. We build relationships. That's our focus. That's what we do. So we don't necessarily represent the Muslim community. We bring the imams and the masjid leadership, the youth front and center, and make sure they're the ones that are having the communication.
Right. So I want to take this back about 12 years because I think we first met was in December 2008 at Texas Dawah Convention, right? The last one before they suspended it for a few years. And those were the good old days, man. But you think about
those are the good TDCs?
Yeah, because I went to one like 3 years ago and it was like not the same. It was not the same.
It was a different vibe now. It's a different vibe.
Yeah. But I think that they're also trying to revive it. So it's like, but when you have an organized convention that goes several years, you have momentum, right? Yeah. And so people had that reputation. When you're trying to build it up again, you kind of have got to restart that momentum. So no shade being thrown at all, but 08 was cool. But I was thinking back to a time we were at like Katz's Deli, that spot you got in Houston with those.
Katz's never closes.
Yeah. So that's a spot where everyone would go. And I remember some of the people at those tables, yourself, Haitham Suleiman, Amar al-Shukri, Danish Siddiqui. And you think about where these guys have gone in the last 12 years, about the kind of work that's like Amar you had on your program, I think on the Flattening the Atheist Curve show, right?
Yeah, Flattening the Atheism Curve.
Amar, he was crashing with me in my hotel room. He just showed up. He's like, hey, I need a place to crash. That Texas Dawah Convention, right? And now he's like, an accomplished like religious leader, leading the community, teaches for Al-Maghrib. Haitham went on to become like the head of Muslim Matters. I'm doing the whole podcast thing, which is not a big deal. And then you got
Mad Mooks. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. But like it's really interesting. And then Danish Siddiqui was doing work back then, but now he's just like more evolved. It's more evolved, so to speak. But I've always found that fascinating because I think what happens is I was interviewed for a show a couple of weeks ago. Someone interviewed me, kind of asking my backstory, and people always assume that like where you're at now is where Shariq just fell into doing this kind of work, but that's obviously not the case. Because I remember, because that's not the case with myself for podcasting. It's something that like your life trajectory kind of develops, and then opportunities pop up that you take advantage of. And then things change, and then it manifests itself, right? And I really love that process of what happened. So I'm really curious. Tell me a little bit about your background. I know you're a Houston guy because that's where I met you, and I've only seen you in Houston. But tell me a little bit about your background, like how you grew up, what kind of religious environment you had, education, what you do for like work and all that kind of stuff, just so people can get a framework.
Are you trying to get me married? What's going on here?
No,
I'm already married, man.
I mean, any of the, what I say, I'm married too, but all those sisters that said no to me back in the day, I make sure they realize they made a mistake.
Man, I'm sorry. I don't know what it feels like when a girl says no.
Well, mashallah, you're good looking. You're much better looking than I am, so can't complain.
I was born and raised in Fort Bend County.
Okay.
Which is it's a county, a small suburb of Houston. And growing up as a second generation American Muslim, I have much of the same story as pretty much anyone else who grew up in the South. And when I say grew up in the South, specifically because Muslims that grew up in New York had Muslims all around them. I remember very specifically, my parents were driving down a main strip called Westheimer, and there's a Long John Silver's back when Long John Silver's used to be, the spot. and we're on our way to Long John's, and there's a woman in a sari, an Indian woman in a sari, walking down the sidewalk, and my dad was like, astounded. He was like, look, he tells my mom, look, there's a Desi over here, and and that, that's one of my earliest memories. I don't remember how old I was, but the takeaway from there is that there just weren't that many of us, even though Houston is like numero uno when it comes to in Texas, Desi population now. But back in like the mid 80s to late 80s, it wasn't like that before. I went to elementary school. Maybe there was another Muslim there or a brown person there. Yeah. In middle school, there was one there, but we didn't really self-identify as a Muslim. We self-identified as like a Pakistani, because still being American at that time, growing up at that time, especially when our parents were so fresh, it was, you have to be white to be an American. To celebrate Thanksgiving, that's like a white thing to do. Halloween is a white thing to do. We still partook, but Halloween was still a white thing to do. Being proud to be an American, that's a white thing to do. So essentially it was just American equals, what's your level of whiteness? And so that wasn't us. So I always identified as a Pakistani. I know many of my friends in high school and in middle school identified as a Pakistani as well. And then high school went along. I was totally Americanized, I guess. Wasn't as much practicing as I should have been. I still prayed. But then when 9/11 really happened, that's when the overwhelming majority of the Muslim community, especially of our generation, that's when we really reevaluated who we were. That's the whole concept of like identity crisis came into play, generation and cultural gaps came into play. Because until September 12th, 2001, we were still asleep.
Right.
But after that, it's like no excuse.
What part of like being American, because you're from Texas, and I always get this impression that being a Texan is also a strong identity, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
What does that mean? Like, is that something you embrace, that you get behind as well? Like being born and raised in Texas? Like, what does that mean? Being a Texan?
I think it means a lot more to people outside of the state than it means to people inside of the state. And I say that because whenever I go out to New York or California or Washington, wherever it may be, and you say you're from Houston, they're like, oh, you're from Texas. No, I just said I'm from Houston. I didn't say I'm from Texas, but you're right, I'm from Texas. I think the culture of being a Texan is far greater outside of Texas. Even my cousins, I caught my cousins so many times. They'll be on the phone when they're here visiting, and be like, oh, I'm with my cousins from Texas. Bro, you're in Houston.
Yeah.
What do you say? I'm with my cousins from Cali, or do you say I'm with my cousins from LA?
Right.
You say Illinois or Chicago, right?
Yeah.
Do you say Montana? I don't even know a city in Montana, so I can't use that as an example. What's the city in Montana?
Helena.
Yeah. Are you pulling my leg? Is that for real?
That's for real. It's the capital of Montana.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's pretty cool. That's something new. So I think just like the mythology of Texas is far greater outside than it is inside. But that going said, there's still very specific, especially when it comes to politics. Yeah. There's no politics like Texan politics. Everything works different here in the state. There's mixed. It's a mixed bag of good. It's a mixed bag of not so good, of how much faith influences politics. In fact, we're going to be doing a webinar, I think June 4th or June 6th, with 2 GOP politicians, state representatives in Texas. And the topic is politics and faith, how our faith drives our decisions. You can't do that outside of our state. I mean, you can, but over here, it's just totally accepted. Outside, that would be controversial. Over here, it's understood. God is part of the decision-making process. That's Texas. That's just how it is over here. It's not.
That's a good point. I had Mustafa Tamiz on the show. He's like one of my early guests, right? And he's involved with the Democratic Party in Texas. But then you've got Muhammad Ali Biari. I remember in the 2000s he was the guy that, like, another Texan, but from the GOP side. And this at a time when it was still frowned upon, like. In most parts of the country, the Muslim communities being Republican post 9/11 was completely like taboo, right?
I remember looking at him. And be like, "What's wrong with him? Why is he with the GOP? They don't like him. They don't respect him." I didn't understand the game at that point.
Right.
This was like you said, it was many years ago when groupthink leads you to believe anyone
Yeah.
associated with the Republican Party is somewhat of a moron.
Right. No, because myself, I worked on Bush Cheney's '04 campaign.
Oh man, I just totally judged you.
You know what I'm saying? But it was like interesting. But like looking back, I don't like, it was interesting because I think you look at the overall scheme, and it's funny now because people are very, when in the era of Trump, people are like, well, Bush wasn't that bad. Some people are saying that, not everybody, right? And I guess at the time, I didn't feel like he was that bad either compared to like the comparison, so to speak. You know what I'm saying?
You're
I
talking
don't know.
about a modern day comparison.
Yeah, Bush versus Kerry and Edwards at the time, right?
Sure.
I wasn't sure about like, but at the same time, looking back, I don't think I was as developed in my thinking. A lot of my Republicanness or GOP mindset was I used to sell like soap for Amway. I did Amway and Quick Start, and when I was early in college, and so they're very like GOP pro Republican, free enterprise system, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, because if you look at it, sometimes the GOP can be a big pyramid scheme as well.
Right, exactly. And now it all connected because Betsy DeVos from the Amway family is Trump's Secretary of Education. But
Right.
I think back then you were just taught like, oh, I was, you don't have the layers. You're like, oh, well, they want freedom. They want to take your money away. The liberals do, and they want to empower people who are lazy, et cetera, et cetera. So like, well, that makes sense to me. And I kind of like jumped. And I guess the Democratic Party I was never pitched to be a Democrat.
Right.
You get what I'm saying? And I think it's interesting about how we navigate faith and politics. It's sometimes the first thing we're exposed to, we kind of default to.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the GOP was kind of the first thing because I remember in the 80s, Reagan came to Lafayette, Indiana, where my dad was a grad school student, right? And I remember his motorcade coming through. And everyone was like, Reagan. You didn't know about the war on drugs or what happened in the inner city back then when you were like, I was like 5, right? You just saw the president came and Ronald Reagan seemed like a charismatic guy on TV. And so, you remember that Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. So these things like settled in my brain. And then when I joined Amway and Quick Start, they named themselves Quick Start for a short time. And these big businessmen are talking about the greatness of the Republican Party and the GOP, like straight up at these conventions that I would go to, like, all right, well, yeah, it makes sense, right? And it vibed with my preconceived notions from the past. You get what I'm saying? And not to get into a tangent about that.
I mean, I think the takeaway from what you're saying is you were living in Lafayette, Louisiana?
Lafayette, Indiana.
Oh, in Indiana. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Purdue University.
Oh, right, huh?
Yeah.
No, I thought you said Lafayette, Louisiana.
No.
Maybe we should do a podcast on your childhood trauma.
No, but so 9/11 happens, and then is that when you kind of wake up yourself?
Yeah, no. I remember being at I was a network engineer at Southwestern Bell Internet, SBC Internet. There's no more. I don't think SBC exists anymore. But I remember getting into arguments with people saying, "You Muslims this, you Muslims that," and I would just make up stuff just to feel good. Like, we invented the compass and navigation system. What are you talking about? We're an ancient people, and I was just making stuff up because I didn't know anything about myself. And then I got checked because he pulled out a book and he goes, "No, actually." And it just forced a lot of self-reflection. And, Hamza Yusuf was a big player in my early development. I remember getting his CD from ISNA, actually. Decided to go check out this ISNA scene, see what it's like. And picked up this CD on brotherhood. It was also the first time that I saw a man, this tall, white, dopey-looking dude, screaming at everyone, yelling at everyone after Juma Salah, and he's like this clearly Southern guy, but he's talking like maybe he grew up in like the ghetto, very urban-like. And I go up to him like, because he was speaking about how we shouldn't have Club ISNA, how we shouldn't do this, and he's quoting relevant examples from the Sunnah.
Right.
And all that I grew up with was a Pakistani understanding of Islam. Everyone had a Desi accent. To be a devout Muslim means that you wear shalwar kurta or a thobe.
Right.
You've got to look like a foreigner, and you've got to have this level of beard. And then here's this guy who's the exact opposite of what I grew up with, and he's this, Southern dude, tall, again, like just like, who is this guy? And he made this powerful, impactful speech. I look over at my friend next to me, same boat as I'm in. We're like, man, it shook us. It shook us. We go up to this guy and like, hey man, what's your name? How do I learn more about your life? Yeah. And he's like, well, my name's Soheb Webb. And, and then, I've done this, and this. And then we had a good conversation. I doubt he remembers that, but that moment was part of my turning point in me discovering who I am as a Muslim. And back then, this is when Soheb Webb he was just first starting out. No one really knew who this guy was.
He was much more fiery back then too.
Yeah, he said a lot of interesting things, right? Which he may have evolved from, he may not have evolved from. Either way, they were still relevant to that time and to that situation, which is so important. And the same thing with Hamza Yusuf. I mean, he said a lot of fiery stuff pre 9/11, a little bit after post 9/11.
Right.
But it was all relevant to that time and place, to who we were at that time. We didn't have YouTube. We didn't have, like this, everything that we have now. You were mentioning that earlier. You were mentioning before we started recording about conferences. I think about Texas Dawah, about the Texas Dawah conference. Yeah. It had such a huge and pivotal role pre-YouTube shiur and online course learning shiur, where knowledge wasn't as accessible. And so after I attended ISNA, I got hooked up to this one CD set, The Prophets, Series 1 and 2, and that changed my life.
But by a person we can't name by.
Yeah.
Everyone knows. Yeah, AAA. AAA is good.
AAA. Yeah. So may Allah give him peace and barakah and reward him immensely for the amount of lives that he changed and forgive him of his sins. Ameen. But that guy just totally changed my life. And then after that, I went straight back to Houston, picked up the normal route that a lot of Muslims do, especially in the South. It's you go from not so practicing to very practicing. All of a sudden you're like this whatever Muslim to now you're like the representation of a Salafi Islam.
Right.
And I was definitely a card carrying guy, I think, at one point.
So how did you navigate? What was your so you mentioned Hamza Yusuf's early influence.
Yeah.
Did you because you don't meet many Houston guys that will openly admit that they're like Hamza Yusuf fans.
Well, maybe not all Houston guys like my age and above.
Yeah.
You're right. Maybe not. But
the guys I might know.
We all evolved at a time. I remember loving Hamza Yusuf, being this card carrying Salafi follower or whatever.
Yes.
Secretly loving listening to every Hamza Yusuf lecture out there, like I'm in the closet or something. But he profoundly impacted my life, and I can't tell you how many people would tell me that he's a deviant, that he's this, that he's that. In Houston, we went through this whole ultra Salafi phase, funded, carte blanche by the Saudi government. It's interesting how much, because we have a consulate here. It's interesting how much money they dumped into Houston. It was ridiculous how much money they dumped here.
That's really funny because I had the exact same experience with Hamza Yusuf, and also other Sufi like Hussein Abdul Sattar. I was like the Salafi guy. I was the MSA president at Ohio State, and I had a rule that you couldn't give khutbah on campus unless you're from the Salafi masjid.
Woo!
So that's how I set up the and I'd have their paraphernalia and all that stuff at the dawah tables.
Oh, I love it. Paraphernalia.
Yeah.
You mean the Dar es Salaam books?
No, like brochures, like Why the Word Salafi by Imam al-Albani.
You were a whole different, you were Salafi level 9, man.
So I remember.
I was level 3 in that comparison.
Yeah, so I would wear on Jummah, I would wear the headdress and the thobe on campus. I didn't care. So anyways, Hamza Yusuf comes to Dayton, Ohio in 2007, I want to say. And him and Imam Zaid come and they do a weekend program. So I go, right? And I get back, I go to the Salafi joint, and then my dad was friends with a guy whose brother was a board member at the Salafi Masjid. So my dad was like, someone would ask, he asked my dad, hey, where's Maheen? How's Maheen doing? I was like, Maheen went to Dayton to go see Hamza Yusuf. And then my dad sold me out.
Oh man.
So I get back and I was on the gym with the Salafi joint. His brother pulls me aside, like, "Hey, yo, what's going on?" It's like, yeah, I heard you went to go see Hamza Yusuf. I was like, well,
Man,
you know,
the biggest problem in the world.
and then he was like, "Yo, bro, he's not even a Ikhwani, man. He's straight up Sufi. Like, he's not even like close to us. He's like so far off." And I was just like, but you know, I was just checking it out, right? And then this other brother who had like some good opinion of me, he was like, well, maybe he was going there to understand his deviance, like get the dude in his research. That's what I said, right? But like, but when I realized that weekend when I went there and I spent an entire weekend taking his class, I was like, I agree with like 98% of what this guy says. Yeah. You understand what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
I started realizing that, like, man, we got to get like, there's so much propaganda. There's this term called intellectual incest, where, you know, let's say I'm in a group of people, right? And I would say, let's say I'm in Chicago and then you're in Houston. And I'm like, these Chicago guys are like, those Houston Muslims are all like messed up. Don't even hear them. If you listen to them, it'll corrupt your heart, you know? So don't stay away from them. But like, you create your own, it's what we call an echo chamber, right? You create this echo chamber, yeah. and then you basically make it seem like you can't even like think about listening to somebody else, yeah. right? And so that's what I did. I checked them out, and I was like, wait a second, this is all propaganda. A lot of it is propaganda, right? A lot of it, I think there are fair disagreements, so to speak, but like most of it's propaganda. And it's certainly to the point where there's no reason to like talk about him or to trash him the way they do. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
And you know what? I hate that we have to use that term propaganda, but I came to this as I evolved. And I evolved because there was a very specific teacher in Houston who had a very like cutthroat way of just breaking things apart in a very logical and rational manner, and forcing you to look at yourself. And so I think spending maybe a couple of years with him really opened my eyes up to what I think Islam really was, more of a framework of understanding rather than a set of rules and processes and procedures that we all have to follow. And if we err one way, then like a robot, we will sin. And, you know, it was just, it was the Islam that I knew, it was just fueled by propaganda, which is just terrible.
Yeah.
And I hate saying that, but that's what it was. It was a very packaged level of Islam that, as much as they would say it's non-political, it's non-this and that, it was everything that they were saying it wasn't. It was political. It was designed for a very specific agenda. It was designed to pacify a very specific type of people. And this is obviously my opinion.
Yeah. But like your own...
it's unfortunate that it hit us here in Houston so hard.
You know, one thing that I'll say is, like, I find that people sometimes, we have certain dispositions. Sometimes, like, you know, that would gravitate us towards certain groups, right? And there's no, to be honest, at the end of the day, like, people are going to be in groups. I don't have a problem with that. That in itself is not an issue, right? Yeah. I think sometimes what happens is that, like, when you go overboard with group thinking, and you otherize people that you really shouldn't be otherizing.
It's a gang mentality, Maheen. You're whitewashing it.
Right.
It's a gang mentality. It really became a gang mentality at some point. I mean, I'm not talking Crips and Bloods. There was some really nasty stuff that came out, to the point where the Sufis and the Salafis literally had to sign a truce agreement. Right. You remember that?
Yeah, 07.
Yeah, people call it like a paper, a document of understanding, that we will learn to appreciate one another, blah, blah, blah. Let's call it for what it was. That was a peace agreement.
Yeah.
That's what it was. It was a peace agreement for the leaders to stop calling out one another and for their crazy followers to just chill the hell out. Can I say chill the hell out?
Yeah.
Chill the hell out. That's what it was. It wasn't just, I mean, sure, it was a symbolic gesture, but it was a peace agreement. And we have to take stock that we in America, as the American Muslim community, literally had to sign an internal peace agreement to stave off more craziness. That's the point where we had gotten.
Yeah. Would you say that, by the way, my last guest dropped like 4 F-bombs that I'm not going to edit out, so don't worry about it.
I'll see if I can hit 5.
No, because the nice thing about what happens is when somebody asks me, oh, brother, this is like, this happened on your podcast. I'm like, it's not a Muslim podcast. Why are you listening to it? That's what I always say. It's like the idea is that anyways. But would you say your mindset, because you know, you obviously had to have some kind of personality to establish what you do in Minaret. But being like the kind of closed-minded Muslims we were back in the day, you tend to like try to like you know, I think it goes against your own disposition, would you say? And then you find yourself, because like the whole thing of you listen to the Hamza Yusuf lectures on the low in secret tells me something that like something, you know, yeah, you're being taught this, but there's something about me that doesn't vibe with what I'm being taught.
Yeah, you know what? I think I think it's partially because I didn't always buy everything that was told to me.
Yeah.
I think I looked for family, meaning I looked for that type of friendship.
Mm-hmm.
I have a very close family, but I looked for that type of friendship. It was nice to be a part of something.
Right.
Again, it goes back to being in like a gang mentality. You're
Right.
part of a movement, and a movement to reclaim Islam from these deviants, or to bring about the revival of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah in Houston.
Right.
So you're part of a movement, you're part of something, everyone's strategizing, talking about how can we get rid of these Asharis and these Sufis and these Bravlis. And so it's like you've got a common enemy and you're working towards that goal. But that's not what really preceded Minaret. So right after I just became this, you know, I guess this practicing Muslim, whatever flavor of Islam that I practiced at that time.
Yeah.
I went to a masjid called Sign Out Masjid in Houston during Ramadan, and I wanted to get involved with the community. I was trying to build a website. That didn't work out. Then I became the parking lot guy, directing people after Jummah. Yeah. And that went well for a while, but it gave me some juice and clout with the masajid administration, because I'd get volunteers. Basically, I'd get my friends, my crew together and be like, hey, let's make sure the parking lot thing is situation. This is before Masajid hired out cops. I should tell you this. Okay. This is before we hired out cops. Before it was just like random people doing the masjid parking lot scene. But one Ramadan, I found beer cans behind the masjid. And this is in 02, 03, I want to say. Okay. And it's because kids, a couple years younger than me, I guess they were kids at that time, but a couple years younger than me, were drinking while everyone else was praying Tarawih. And it wasn't just a couple. There was several people, and they were smoking joints, and it was just hanging out, and they were Muslims, you know, a girl with a hijab. And this was just like, I was like, what in the hell? Are you kidding me? Because I came up in a very specific section of the city called Alif. I won't say it was like a rough area, but it wasn't necessarily the best area, and I grew up in a very specific way, in a very specific lifestyle that wasn't the most Islamic. Sure. So I had an understanding of like where I was to where I was now, and these kids, these like rich kids, are smoking joints and drinking beer in the back of the masjid. For me, the only conclusion was they have no idea what's going on. Right. They don't know what they're doing. And so after that, I worked with a couple other guys and started something called Crescent Youth, which grew to be the largest youth organization in Houston for many years. Danish Hassan was a part of it. Haytham Salman came on a little later. Adnan Jalali, one of your previous guests, was a part of it. We also, me and Adnan, also started something called Houston Leadership Academy, a Fajr program, and that was cool. But so I did youth organizational work for about 10 years. And when I say youth org, I don't mean just like one masjid. We expanded throughout the city to where at one point we were having Friday halaqah at 6 or 7 masjid throughout the city at the same time. At the same time. So we had maybe 200-300 young people. And this is 2003, 2004, 2005. This is pre-YouTube. Pre-Vimeo, pre-Daily Motion, pre-Yaqeen, and all these other celebrity shuyukh now. Yeah. No one had we didn't have access to knowledge. Right. The only knowledge that we had access to was like AAA, if they even knew about that. Yeah. Maybe some Hamza Yusuf CDs. But even then, because of marketing, no one really knew what was out there. We just had the sheikh at the masjid whose English sucked. We had the imam at the masjid whose English sucked, who didn't understand what Islam was, and who would say random stuff like driving on the tollway is haram, and adopting kids is haram, and this is haram. And oh, by the way, that's haram too, and then that's haram too. And so that's the version of Islam that a lot of these kids grew up with. So when they would come to our halaqas, it would be like, wow, let's, be doing stories of the seerah, stories of the prophets, stories of this and that, and everyone loved it. Right? Everyone loved it, and so it just grew and grew to where we had so many masajid. It was just so much fun. You remember the YM forums? Do you remember that from back in the day?
Of course, yeah. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So we had CY forums, Crescent Youth forums, where in its heyday, we had like maybe 150 people on the message board at the same time. People are listening, they're like 150 people on the message board. That's peanuts. But again, we have to contextualize. This was like 03, 04, 05. That is just, that was insane. It was madness. And the amount of people we had on the message board talking about it. Even today, you come to Houston, you talk to people around my age, and you mentioned CY forums. Almost everyone will know what that was. Right?
Yasser Qadi, was he well known in Houston at that point?
Yeah, he was well known.
Okay.
He was well known. He was a Houston homegrown kid. I don't know if he claims Houston anymore, but yeah, he was a Houston homegrown kid, absolutely.
But was he like, I remember back then he was like teaching, because one of the earliest lectures the old on audioislam.com, they would have all his lectures that he was to teach.
Ooh,
right?
Those lectures were not supposed to be recorded. Are they still there?
They're still available on a podcast.
Man, some of these lectures are not supposed to be there. I should preface it by saying, I think Yasser Bhai has always been awesome.
Yeah.
He's always said what was on his mind, and more power to him.
Right.
His positions have definitely evolved. He has evolved and become so much more relevant to the Muslim community.
Right.
You've got to understand that back then, he was incredibly relevant for a few reasons. He spoke English, and he grew up in America.
Right.
So
you say he spoke English. You saying he spoke English 3 times?
I did.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha. Emphasize. All right.
Yeah.
I got you.
And so we didn't have access to that. Right. We didn't have access to that. So when he would come at a masjid, it's like anyone who self-identified as a practicing Muslim, we'd be there. And then our parents would be there because he could throw in some Urdu as well. And it was just like, wow. Because his understanding and representation of Islam was he was a unicorn. It was so unique.
Yeah.
And his eloquence was so unique. Just how he connected Islam to being an American.
Right.
Unheard of. Right. You have to remember, birthdays were still haram. Shaking hands was still haram. Thanksgiving was haram. Voting was shirk. Right?
Yep.
Voting was shirk. Saying the Star Spangled Banner is like, mother, you're not I should say it like the way they say it. Or ahi. You know you're not really American. You know you're not really accepted. You're a Muslim. Be accepted by Allah.
Yeah.
You don't have to sing the Kuffar's national anthem. That's like, because we still have that mentality. But then Yasser Bhai it wasn't like that. It was very refreshing.
No, for sure. I think I met him in 2005, right? First time. He just graduated from Medina and he was starting at Yale. And there's still remnants because I think it took, certainly as we transition through our phases of religiosity, it doesn't happen like overnight. You go through phases, right?
Absolutely.
So he came out, and when he met me for the first time, I was at like the apex of my like hardcoreness, right? Right.
You're what I call you're a member of the SS.
Yeah. So,
Super Salafi.
Right. I pick him up, and I'm wearing a turban and a thobe at the airport, right? And he's like, "Do you always dress like this?" And I'm like, "Well, why not? What's wrong with it?" And I'm like, "Sheikh, is it haram though? Is it permissible to wear red?" Because I heard it's like, and he would be like, and then the crazy thing was, I introduced him to all my boys who were just like me, and they were like asking him about like Darul Harb, like, Sheikh, do you think we live in Darul Harb, right? The land of war, and we're like eating ice cream and stuff, right? And he's like, "Now where the hell am I?" Like, I'm in Columbus, Ohio. So, but I'll tell you one. At the time, my parents were celebrating they had their 25th anniversary party going down. Right, it was during a Maghrib weekend, and their friends had thrown a party for them. And I told them I wasn't gonna go because imitating the kuffar, right? So, and I remember telling Sheikh Yasser, I was with them, and then he didn't really like say like today he would have been like, "Yo, dude, go to your parents' anniversary party." But back then he was kind of like, "Well, I can see your point of view." And all my friends were like, "Man, there's no obedience to the creation in disobedience to the creator. So don't go to your parents' anniversary party, man." So I remember but I got so much heat from my folks for like a long time for not going, right? But yeah, it's just funny how we involve. So how does the minute, like, so when we're hardcore, when we're going through these phases, I don't think most people aren't thinking too much about outreach, right? You're not thinking about engaging with like non-Muslims at all, really? Would you agree with that?
Pin that question. Let's go back to the phase thing real quick.
The what?
Is that cool?
Yeah. The what?
Pin that question. That question. Let's get back to that in just a second.
Sure. Okay.
Let's backtrack a little bit about your parents' anniversary party.
Sure.
I just want to reflect on this moment. If anyone's listening might be going through a hardcore phase. You know, I think the people that we hurt the most when we're going through a phase like that are our friends and our loved ones. I partially regret going through that phase, but also going through that phase helped my development and helped me learn so much more about life and people who are filled with nonsense versus people who aren't. But I remember saying stuff like, you know, birthdays are this, Thanksgiving is that. My parents wanted to do this. I'd be like, that's not allowed Islamically. I legit remember telling my parents that your Quran, how do we even know if it's accepted? Because you're not even saying your ayns correctly. Just the level of hurt that I put on my parents in the guise of true Islam. And, you know, I hear this not just with Muslims, but with Christians as well.
Yeah.
A phase, this hardcore phase. And, you know, man, frankly, I think back to it and I think, yeah, I listened to the wrong people. I listened to the wrong CDs. I hung out with the wrong crew. But now I see these same shuyukh. They've completely evolved. They forgot to mention to everyone else that, oh, hey, by the way, you should evolve too. And this is why I evolved. So it's like they became better. They realized that all their stuff was just nonsense. But they sort of forgot to tell everyone else. And you know what? No one apologized. And I know that sounds really weird to say, but it's when you have a position over people, when you know that hundreds, maybe thousands of people, especially young, impressionable minds like myself and so many others, are looking to you for a better understanding, going through an identity crisis, this post 9/11. I think you have a responsibility to your, as my Christian brothers and sisters would say, to your flock, right. To make sure that your flock understands that you've evolved and these positions may not always be the same and that things are a lot more fluid than they were because, you know, they completely evolved. You know, it's not like everyone was like Yasir Qadhi. You remember when Yasir Qadhi shook hands with a woman and the world blew up and pigs were flying and the sky cracked because he shook hands with the woman. Mind you, these same Muslims weren't talking about African-American oppression. They weren't talking about what's happening with the Navajo and the Cherokee on their own reservations. Right. They weren't talking about the alcoholism epidemic. No care about the rest of the community, right. About the rest of the world, focused solely inside. And when a man shakes a hand with a woman, it's like all of a sudden my world cracks. And then Yasir Qadhi had to go and write this extensive article, got a lot of flack from people, whatever, sheep. But when he did that, he caught a lot of flack for showing that he had evolved, that showed that his thinking had evolved. But what he did was so incredibly courageous because he signaled to thousands of young people out there that, look, where I was yesterday is not where I am today. Right. And this is why I'm at here. This is why I'm here. And maybe it's time for our positions to evolve. But so many imams, so many religious leaders and thought leaders fail to do that. So what happens when they got up, packed up their bags and moved out of the neighborhood? We got left behind, or a lot of people got left behind, not knowing what to do. So we just carried the torch, thinking this was the right thing to do, until we got hit by a bus and realized, holy crap, what I've been doing, it's not right. It's just a side point, but I just want to highlight the accidental harm that many of us caused to our. I can't imagine if my son didn't attend my anniversary party. I would be immensely hurt. Immensely hurt. And the same type of stuff that I did to my parents. Right. I can't imagine the amount of hurt that I gave them under the guise of, you know, they're happy that I'm finally religious. I'm finally praying. I'm finally reading the Quran. You know, I'm finally, in their words, finally doing Allah, right? I'm finally doing this. Like, I made it here. We don't have to worry about him.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, he's become like Taliban, pointing his fingers at me, and now I've become the enemy. So I went from like almost one extreme to the other, but that's just not my story. Apparently, it's your story as well, and the story of so many in our friend circles.
Well, you know what's really, there's something that's like interesting to think about. Like my at the time, I remember because I used to go to these Salafi conferences, right? And they would have like tapes that said authentic Salafi publication, authentic Salafi audio, and like the cover of the image of the tape would be like, the design would be like the Saudi Gutra, the red and white like head covering, right? That's how blatant it was. Right. So I remember my dad, he found it in my car. He's like, hey, why are you listening to this stuff? Are you Salafi? I'm like, heck yeah. Like, you know, and then he was like, you know, all this stuff. My dad in his 70s now has become a Salafi.
Oh, no.
It's so funny because he's listening. Like, it's funny because, you know, he's been like listening to stuff on YouTube and he's like, there's all this stuff. Because he's like, oh, this sounds interesting. It's almost because, you know, sometimes it's like, what are you exposed to? Right. Like you grow up and then he's natural. Now he's like, oh, he's got time to watch lectures. He's not working anymore. So he found some Bangladeshi Salafi guys. They speak only Bengali. No. And so he's telling me about how following madhabs is not good. And, you know, we should take the strongest. I was like, I'm just, but I don't say nothing now. I'm just amused by it. Because like you learn your lesson. I'm not like really like debating. Because back then, like 15 years ago, I would have debated with them. Right now, I'm just like, I mean, listen, I said the same thing to him 15 years ago, and now it came back to me.
Dang, cycle of life, man.
You know what I'm saying? But that's really interesting. I was like, really, really fascinating how that, because back then he wasn't like that. My dad was more of like your typical Isna uncle Muslim.
Yeah.
You understand?
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful that someone can have that level of pride.
Right. But now my dad, he's like, you know, he's still involved in the community. It's not like that. And it's definitely a healthier version than maybe the stuff we did like back in the day, right? Because I can't imagine the kind of the drama. But I think for me is the thing that always kept me level in some ways is that I never shied away from outreach. Even as MSA president, like if somebody like would approach me for a project, I never said no to it, right? I remember I would have coffee with people from Hillel, the Jewish group, or
you can't do that now, bro. Otherwise, you know what I'm saying? You're a traitor sellout.
You know what I'm saying? But like because they would reach out to me, they were like, they want to understand, they want to do an article. I'm like, sure, I'll meet with you, no problem. Or we had a group called Students for Dialogue, right? It's a Turkish group, but like we know they're like the Gulenist guys, right? But you know, but I was a part of that organization for like a couple of years, right? And because to me, I was like at the same time, I was like, listen, like I can't be like, it just didn't make sense to me that I would be in a bubble. But anyways, I want to get like the point we pinned, the outreach to non-Muslims. What was your outlook back then? How did that evolve to eventually kind of to get you the kind of work you're doing now?
You know, so as my gray hair started increasing, there's a point where I would be giving khutbahs at a high school almost every week. And one time I was giving a khutbah at a high school, and this is, I think I was either in my late 20s or early 30s. I don't really remember. It was 2007 or 2008. I was giving khutbah at a high school, and this one of these kids just started talking in my khutbah. And in my mind, and it's okay, no problem. You know, they're high school kids. I've always been able to tolerate it. No big deal. I can work around it. I can call them out in the khutbah, make everyone laugh, redirect, refocus back onto my message, keep moving on, keep chugging along, keep pushing the sales pitch. Yeah. But when that kid started talking, I won't forget, it was Maid Creek High School. The kid started talking during my khutbah, and in my mind, I said, Asala Batamiz. And I said in Urdu like that. And for our non-Urdu speaking people, it means like shameless. Yeah. Well, what's wrong with this kid?
Right.
In that moment, like someone snapped a finger in front of my face and said, you're done. Like it's over. Youth work is in the past now. Now you have to find something new. And that's when the process of trying to identify what my next path, what my next journey in life was. And so it took some time, but what happened was I was invited to a couple of churches, a couple of places, high schools, to talk about what Islam was. They had gone to an MSA, and there was a non-Muslim teacher that was a MSA sponsor, and he had a lot of questions about Islam. My background has always been in sales.
Okay.
My background, so giving presentations and talking to people, public setting has never been an issue for me. I think my leadership potential really started in high school when I had to do a lot of public speaking, I was in ROTC in high school. I don't know if you guys had that.
Yeah, we did.
But I was the guy marching with the flag in high school. And so I was gung-ho, Marine Corps all the way, enlisted and everything. It didn't work out, but it was just the mindset that I was on. And so I started giving presentations and realized that, wow, I love talking to people about Islam, but I don't want to convert anyone. You remember that one? Series? I don't know if Omar put it out. How to get your shahada in 10 minutes or less.
Yep.
You remember that? Man.
Yeah, I remember. Shit came out. I remember. I want to ask him what he thinks about it now, because we brought him to give that presentation at Ohio State back in like 2006.
Whoa. Yeah, and I remember sitting in that program thinking, wow, how do you get a shahada in 10 minutes? And it was more like, believe, you can do it. People will see the beauty of Islam, and all of a sudden, boom, bam, they'll become Muslim. You just have to ask for it, like you're asking for a sale. And
you make the close. You got to close.
Yeah. And so it was all about conversion. I'm sure he mentioned that Allah's al-Hadi, this and that.
Yeah.
But all of that got lost in the whole sales pitch mentality.
Right.
Pitching Islam. So I remember trying that out, and just devastating failures, humiliating failures. And it's like, my background is in sales. I close deals all the time. Why am I not able to close Islam? It's a period of self-reflection, but I realized I like talking about Islam, not to convert people, but as a public relations tool. I just want people to know who we are. It's just a communications mechanism. I just want to inform other people. And as I'd mentioned to you, that there was this guy in Houston for a couple of years. I attached myself to him, went to his classes. He exposed me to a different understanding of what I would like to call American Islam. I started learning about the names and attributes of Allah. And one of the ones I really focused on and drilled down on was Al-Hadi. Was the concept that Allah is the one that guides, not we as a people don't guide. Our job is to inform. And so for me, the work that I've been doing is merely about informing others about who we are as a people, rather than trying to convert, trying to guide, trying to proselytize or push, why Islam pamphlets down people's throats, right?
Okay.
So the Minaret Foundation's approach is completely different. It's just information-based.
I got you. Now, you mentioned to me offline, we were talking about, like, there was a gentleman you met from, like, Yugoslavia.
Yeah, I wouldn't call him a gentleman, though.
Okay, well, a male person, a male figure.
Yes. A Slavic male.
Okay.
A Slavic male. So when I started doing these presentations, there weren't a lot of Muslims that were doing interfaith work or doing public speaking work that were born and raised here who had a knack for it. I mean, we always have aunties and uncles that will do open houses and masjid tours and tell everyone how hijab is all about modesty. It's not. How Islam is has completely freed people. It hasn't. How Islam is this modern religion, and this and that. And it's just a complete misrepresentation of what Islam was. And so I would get called on a lot to talk about Islam. Ended up crossing places with interfaith ministries and a couple of other prominent Muslims in the community who introduced me to who I like to call the godfather of interfaith work. And I make dua for him all the time. His name's Reverend Steve Quill. He's of the Lutheran Church. And he was just a mover and shaker, and he still is a mover and shaker in the larger Houston community when it comes to interfaith work. He's an amazing, amazing person. Also, he's the guy that introduced me to Christian's Tailgate, which is a terrific burger shop. It used to be a terrific burger shop. I don't know if it is anymore. But we were having burgers together, and he said, hey, listen, a spot is opened up on this trip to former Yugoslavia. We're going to go to Macedonia and Croatia and learn how faith leaders influenced the healing of post-Yugoslavian war, of the post-Yugoslavian war era. And that sounded really interesting to me. And for me, I was doing business, pretty broke, off of a pretty traumatic situation in my life. And he was like, "Oh, it's $75." It's like, yes, I'm in.
$75 to go to Yugoslavia.
Yeah, I was like, I'm in.
Yeah.
Because there was another rabbi who was supposed to go, but he had to back out. And back then, fares were not reversible. And just to switch it to my name was 75 bones. And that's all it was. And that trip changed the direction of my life. Meeting Steve changed the direction of my life altogether. Go to this trip to Yugoslavia. It's me, a rabbi who I now like to call my rabbi, Steve Gross. Really, really awesome guy. We're great friends. My wife is great friends with his wife as well. We were just hanging out the other day on Zoom late at night. So hooked up with a guy named Rabbi Steve Gross, Pastor Chris Lake, and all these other pastors from the Lutheran Church. And I was the only Muslim there. Now, not an imam, obviously.
Right.
And then we would go place to place, and what we were trying to do is a typical tour. We landed in Macedonia, and then we went to Croatia afterwards. But we met with people for whom the war took an enormous toll, or they played a hand in the war, good or evil. To understand why they did what they did and how their faith, whether it be Christianity or Islam, brought them back to the center, how it helped heal them. One of the first meetings we had, on the first day, we were with this guy. Totally Slavic looking, stereotypical Slav. You don't want to be caught in a dark alleyway with him. Maybe I'll share his picture later. He didn't speak a lick of English. He spoke through a translator, but he was able to say this part in English. And so he's talking about his role. He's talking about his role in the conflict. And to give you some background, he was paramilitary in Macedonia. And for those who don't know, Macedonia, so pre like breakup of Yugoslavia, it was all just Yugoslavia, but you had different parts of the state of Yugoslavia. So Macedonia was one, Bosnia-Herzegovina, you have Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, so on and so forth. And they're ethnic Macedonians. An ethnic Macedonian is Christian, right? But the Muslims that were living in Macedonia at that time, still to this day, are Albanian. Albanians ethnically, for the most part, are Muslim, right? So you have Macedonians living on one side of the street, you have Albanians living on one side of the street, Albanians and Muslims, Albanians and Macedonians, they go to their own schools because Macedonians speak Macedonian, Albanians speak Albanian. They don't mix their languages. They don't mix their cultures. They don't mix their religions. There's no intermarriage. There's no intercultural cooperation. So he said he grew up on the other side of the road playing football with his own friends, whereas he saw the Albanian children playing with their own friends, and we never played with one another. Right? Apparently, through our exploration of the country, this was not a unique situation. This was the norm. Everyone stuck to their own ethnicities. There was no mixing, right? And so this guy, paramilitary, meaning unsanctioned militia, or not part of the military itself, and because they don't have the military code of ethics, and they're not necessarily as disciplined, they were the animals in the war. Like the animals, part of the ones who did all the indiscriminate killing, the massacres, the roundups of the males, the raping of the females. That was him. And he held a leadership position in paramilitary. But he said that we were asking him, how did you get to this point where you were able to kill your Muslim neighbors? He said that we grew up on opposite sides of the street. You know, we went to our own schools. We played up with we didn't play with one another. We didn't speak to one another. And so when the politicians started talking about how the other side had dual identities, dual loyalties, that they're this, they're this, they're this, every trope in the book, it was easy for us to digest it and process it and accept it because we didn't know one another. So when the call came, I didn't know your kind, so it was easy for me to kill them like dogs. It was that moment where everything shifted for me. That moment, it's like all out. Everyone has to know about who we are as a people. We cannot afford to be quiet and not proud of who we are, and not hide behind the masjid of this concept of we are Muslims, we are superior, we have the shahada, we are this, we are that, they are the kuffar. There's no, we can't waste that time. It's just, it's not going to work out anymore. And so, I mean, throughout the trip, I went to Bosnia afterwards, and it was a common theme. People didn't know who their neighbors were. They just didn't know who their neighbors were. So it was easy for them to pick up a weapon. Yeah, there's so many stories of intermarriages, but I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the crazies, paramilitary, some of the elite killing teams. This was a common story. They didn't know who a Muslim was. They didn't understand who we were as a people. At that time, my outreach work was really fueled by fear. It was fueled by, if there's another event like 9/11 in our country, and this is during Bush's time, I think, or at the beginning of Obama's time, it was, what will our own countrymen do to us? Japan, what happened to the Japanese was just 70 years ago. We're still trying to process it as a country. As a country, we still haven't fully understood the ramifications of rounding up Americans of Japanese descent in our country. We still haven't even, we still haven't worked through this yet. And 9/11 was just a few years ago for me when I went to Yugoslavia, and I understood that we didn't really talk about who we are. We held open houses, but let's be honest, man. We held open houses to get them. We wanted to get a Muslim. We wanted to get a Shahada. That's why we held the open houses. That's why we held the Major tours. It wasn't necessarily to inform people. I'm sure there's people here and there. I'm talking specifically about Houston. It was more about converting them, about showing them how amazing we are and how awesome we are. It wasn't necessarily from the lens of, I just want them to know who we are and answer any and all of their questions, to dispel any kind of misinformation. It was a sales pitch every single time. And that's the story of how Minaret Foundation really began.
That point in your experience with practicing Jews and practicing Christians, my perception has always been for Muslims, especially like, because we feel like we have the truth, right? That's a natural kind of understanding, everyone
right? Feels they have the truth, but we have, I mean,
and then
I believe that we have the truth.
But I'm saying, like, when we so therefore there's this, like, so for example, I'll give you an example of how this channel kind of materialized in a way. About what's it, like, almost 2 years ago now, I spent like 10 weeks taking a class at a church. Like, it was a church that they talked about the tenets of Christianity. I was invited there by a coworker. This coworker and I were having conversations about Islam and Christianity. She couldn't answer some of the questions, so she asked me if I could just, and I was like, yeah, sure. I mean, and I've always, like, said sometimes, like, I've always perceived Christians as being like low-hanging fruit. You know what I'm saying? So I go there, and it's a great experience. It's a great experience. Really friendly folks. And I'll tell you what, they got their marketing down. Their brand, like, their branding and everything is on point. Everything's like really great experience. And really comfortable. I feel comfortable even today going into that church and just hanging out and meeting and people, the friends that I made, etc. But I would always be like, but like, I remember the question arises, like, but okay, like, I get what you believe now. I definitely understand. And that was the beneficial point, is like, I did understand. It allowed me to understand the mindset of other people, right? But it was like, but I still don't understand why. But then I was like, it doesn't make sense to me why you believe it, but you still do. And there's nothing I really could do about it, right? But I think if we understand why, if we can understand the why behind it, then we can at least come to an understanding, even though we're not gonna, because like you said, we all know, every Muslim agrees that guidance is in God's hands, right? But then, like, we seem to, like, think that, like, no, we got to get that person.
Yeah.
And there's this like internal struggle. It's like the struggle between, and sometimes I, like, ask myself, do I really, like, why do I want this person to become Muslim? Is it for my own ego? Just because, like, what happens is you'll dialogue with your buddy. They'll be like, hey, how many conversions did you get? And then, I'm saying, like, wait, I mean, at the end of the day, like, why does it matter? Well, you can get a conversion, but that dude leaves Islam in 2 months because you didn't take care of him. Like, are you ready to do the work to also, be that person support network, so to speak, But I think that's kind of interesting how that evolves. Like you realize like, okay, because some people think interfaith work and they're like, oh, if you're not doing dawah, if you're not proselytizing, it's pointless.
Nonsense.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, oh, you're wasting your time and it shouldn't be kumbaya. And the reality is that like, it's not kumbaya. It's just, you are getting your point across, but you're not being a jerk about it. Because what happens is if you go on the offensive too much, it's very obvious you're going to become a jerk. Would you agree with that? It comes across as very much like, I'm only interested here in getting that conversion. Does that make sense?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. But I'm going to give you a little bit of pushback. I think a lot of interfaith work ends up being kumbaya, and kumbaya work definitely has its place. As Steve said, one of my mentors, as he said, was you have to have kumbaya because it's part of the maintenance of a relationship. So it's not just about creating that relationship, but you've got to have this level of getting together frequently, holding hands, talking about our commonalities, and saying out loud, we have so much more in common than we don't. And quite often that's looked at as kumbaya, and people who approach interfaith work sometimes for the first time ever see just that without seeing how like love and kinship and friendship is actually growing between two communities who, aqidah-wise, were on polar opposites.
Right.
So the kumbaya work is important, but it's also important to continue developing relationships and identifying, well, what happens after we hold hands? Like, what's next? Do we just get together again for the next year, or do we make like a strategic plan for our communities to come together?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that we always talk about. Like, there's obviously points we agree as faith communities. People always agree. Like, we have similar issues, similar things that work. The whole issue of atheism, right? Many people would say now that like atheism, the rise of atheism and its implications are something that all like Jews, Muslims, and Christians can all get behind, right?
All
you know what I'm saying? But I guess it's always like the people in the back of their mind. I wonder if they're thinking like, yeah, but like, okay, maybe they're not an atheist, they become a Christian, but it's still not good enough. You got what I'm saying? Or they become a Jew. Or if you're a Christian, oh, he's a Muslim. It's all right. He's not an atheist, but he's still not good enough. How much of that do you still exist? Like, I feel like for me, that still exists in the back of my mind. Like when I'm talking to like a person of another faith, I'm like, yeah, I'm glad they're not an atheist. I'm glad they believe in God, but yeah, they're still like, you get what I'm saying? And a part of it is like, I don't know if it's a shortcoming on my end, but I'll be honest, it's still there. Like it's still like in the back of my head sometimes. If not all.
I think after you continue to hang out, most of the people that interact with are pastors and rabbis.
Right.
Most of them. Mm-hmm. And most of them it's just they're just friends, and I just enjoy hanging out with them. It's just so nice. I don't know. I don't really think that at least they're not atheists. And I think that's just because where I'm at right now versus where I was before.
Right.
But now it's just more of, I'm just so glad to have friends who aren't like me. And it's just refreshing because they are able to enrich my life through their life's perspectives and through their viewpoints on just the news of the day. They see it so differently because they don't see it from the same lens that I do. And it's so refreshing because I get to understand and learn from different cultures, different age groups, different ethnicities, who I would previously never have a chance to interact with if I was just interacting with Muslims. You remember you were saying something earlier about an echo chamber. Sometimes accidentally, how no matter how intellectual we become or how advanced or progressive we become, we sometimes unfortunately continue to live in an echo chamber that just validates our own life's viewpoints rather than getting challenged. And being challenged is where we grow. I'm growing basil. Like I grow basil. It's crazy. Like in quarantine, I've gotten this green thumb.
Yeah.
And I've just become, all of a sudden, I've just become like this gardener. It's really weird. I love pesto, so I'm harvesting my own basil. And I have no less than, it's going to sound a little crazy, I have no less than about 60 basil plants. Pretty much all full grown. There's just so much basil, it's ridiculous. But part of growing basil, I realize when they're small seedlings and if there's a heavy wind, they just blow over. And my first inclination used to be, let's just grab them and pull them back into the patio. But then I watched a couple YouTube videos after those plants started dying that you have to leave them in the wind, because when the wind pushes them over, they gain more strength or something in their stems, and they grow stronger and they can stand upright longer, and they grow taller because of the wind pushing them. And that's just so much like having different viewpoints and different perspectives and being challenged on your perspective. Unless you're challenged, your viewpoint, no matter how many good points you have, will always be weak, because you don't understand how to counter. You won't understand other people's perspectives. When you have the benefit of learning different perspectives, you can evolve your own perspective, and you can become stronger in your own faith. So oftentimes you hear within leadership of people who operate in interfaith circles, it's talking to Christians and Jews and Hindus and Buddhists. It doesn't necessarily guide me or take me away from Islam. It only makes my Islam that stronger.
Right.
It's just so true.
But I definitely see the point as far as like how you can learn from them. I follow some of these pastors on Instagram now, the ones that I've met, or we exchange emails back and forth. We had a book club going for a little bit where we'd exchange books, right? I'd give them a book I want them to read. They gave me a book that they, and we'd talk about it.
The Illustrated Guide to Islam. Is that one of the books that you gave?
No, the book I gave, they gave me, I always ask questions about the Trinity. So they gave me 2 books on the Trinity. And then I gave them a book called Islam, the Destiny of Man by Guy Eaton. Really good book if you ever get a chance to read it. It's about like understanding Islam from like a European perspective. Like, cause like in light of European biases, etc. But anyways, but it's just like, again, interesting and seeing how they navigate. Like I talked about the church, how they we need our organizations, our institutions need to understand like how they can like make religion or faith, because people are different phases, right? If I can go to a mosque and get a cup of coffee, right, and just hang out on a couch, and the mosque is still there, that's a welcoming environment. Or, you have so many people now that they want to disparage the idea of having basketball courts.
Right.
And I'm like, listen, not everyone, like, sometimes worshiping is hard. Yeah. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you don't feel like doing it. But if you got to create this environment you got to understand where we live in, right? And the temptations and the opportunities to do other stuff, right?
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? So I definitely think they, like, the church that I attended, they certainly had that, they got that down pat. And I'm still like, and I am like, I was talking to our group leader. She left the church. She's still Christian. She moved away. She's doing this thing where she's living in Portugal right now with her husband and her kid. And it's almost like she's going on this journey to see the creation of God. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's so dope. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, she's gone for like 10 months and she's like, and we were talking about like on Facebook Messenger, like a couple of weeks back, about how like, we have pilgrimage, but then we go to like certain Muslim like lands. Like I was in Morocco and I got to meet like certain like we call awliya, or like saintly people, kind of, obviously I've completely diverted from my past.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But
10 years ago is rolling around in his grave.
Right. So but she was telling me like, yeah, we have these kind of figures too that we're visiting, and I know like that's it, because it kind of gives you this whole point of like living tradition. Like, how can you find things, because there are things that within our tradition that are kind of maybe dormant, that maybe that are there that we only realize once we see the Christians or the Jews, they have something similar, and they kind of educate us about what we may have that we're sleeping on, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And vice versa. So I definitely see that point. For me, it's still a mindset shift. I'm very transparent about my shortcomings. Like, I'm not gonna come out here and say that like I don't want people to convert. Like, but at the same time, like, there has to be it's something I struggle with, so to speak. You get what I'm saying?
Listen, I totally feel you. But going back to what you're saying about basketball courts, is one thing that we have to understand is, I remember when I was doing this work in the beginning, I'd go to these churches and these synagogues and be like, man, why can't our masajid be like this? Right. Why can't we have this branding? Why can't we have these brilliant lecture series and these libraries? Why are we just building worship spaces? Just like big empty halls. And the conclusion that I came to a few years ago is, I forget who put it in me, but our community, man, is only about 18 years old. We're really only about 18 years old. And I'll tell you why I believe that. The Christian and the Jewish community have had hundreds of years to evolve. The Jewish community has had since the late 1800s to evolve in this country. The Christians have been evolving since they, accidentally, or since they landed on Plymouth Rock, as Malcolm would say. But we're really only about 18 years old. Now, I understand that Nation of Islam has been around, or the African-American Muslim community has been around for a long time. Absolutely. The Nation of Islam was something that I think most Muslims can agree on. It wasn't necessarily very Muslim as much as it was a political movement. And I'm sure people will disagree with me, and that's cool. Drop me a line. But then after the Honorable Elijah Muhammad passed away, his son, Imam Waruddin Muhammad, took over and steered the Nation of Islam into what it is today, which is a community predominantly of African American, but Muslims, Sunni Muslims, like practicing straight, legit. I mean, this is, and so what they were able to do, and this I believe happened in 74 or 75, what they were able to do was create a better understanding of what it means to be an American Muslim. That being said, the majority of the modern day Muslim immigration took place after 1965. Lyndon B. Johnson passed the Immigration Naturalization Act, which allowed everyone to come into this country, not just Italians and Northern Europeaners, but Latinos, Southeast Asians, South Asians, anyone from MENA, just anywhere from the third world was able to just come to this country. And so wave after wave of Muslim immigration came. But when we came, Mahin, we came from colonialized lands, former colonialized lands. And you know just as well as I do that the British did a number on our people for generations. And part of that number was a divide and conquer strategy. Getting each of us to point a finger at one another, making it part of our daily routine, pacifying us, any type of resistance, any type of speaking out, removed. It was like almost they took our genetic coding, they removed that that aspect of where we speak out. They just removed that from our DNA. And so when our elders came, and I'm generalizing, when our elders came to this country, it was they made it. They came here, they did their school, they sent their remittances back to Pakistan, India, Egypt, wherever. And they lived in this country, and they didn't necessarily wear their Islam on their sleeves, unless they wore shalwar kurta at the grocery store. But they didn't necessarily wear Islam on their sleeves. And so I grew up like that. How was your experience in high school? Is whenever I'd be called like a Gandhi or a sand nigger, sorry if this word triggers anyone, or a camel jockey or a towel head, it was just, I tell my parents about my experiences, and it would just be, look the other way, it's all right, don't raise a ruckus, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
But you say that to an American, or again, I said it, like I would, you say that to a white parent, it's not going to fly. Or a black parent, it's just not going to fly. Like you have to stand up for yourself. You have to speak out and say something. And so that just didn't happen. So I think what happened was, we kept our Islam quiet and we kept it private until September 11, 2001. We didn't really engage in much advocacy, civic engagement, interfaith work. Yeah, there was ISNA, there was our masajid, there was care, but it wasn't the care and the ISNA that we know today. ICNA, mass, same thing. It was mostly inward focused. It was very insular. I mean, even care to this day really focuses, actually I'm gonna get some flack on this, but it really focuses heavily on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, right? Heavily, instead of the American civil rights movement. Again, that's my opinion. If you're going to be upset by it, drop me a line. Cool with it. Mahin is not endorsing my views. But so the reason that I said we're 18 years old, man, is because after the towers fell, that's when Muslims like me and Muslims everywhere realized, holy crap, no one knows who we are. No one has any freaking idea of who we are as a people, as a community. Our elected officials don't know, our employers don't know, our neighbors don't know. Our employers know that we take an extended lunch, but why and for what reason? Why Muhammad goes, he's got to go to prayers, but why?
Yeah.
No one understands like who we are. And so 18 years ago, you can trace most of the modern civil rights and advocacy organizations in the community, the engagement organizations, you can trace it back to the post 9/11 era.
You know, it's really interesting that you had that perspective. I have a friend who studied in Morocco. He's been on my show like 3 times already. He was in Fez and Takairowain, right? Younger kid. He's like 27. Umer, and Umer Hasib. If you ever guys need to invite somebody in Houston to speak to the youth, he'd be phenomenal. But he was explaining this to his old sheikh in Morocco, who was like at the time I think over 100 years old, and he was like talking about how like everything in Morocco is so awesome, et cetera, and the Muslim community and like all this, and there's centers of spirituality. And he's like, yeah, because we've been here for like 1,000 years, right? And you guys, your community's only, and he said like 30 years old because that's when that's when our parents came. He didn't say 18, but he said 30. You know, it's with 30, 18, you get the picture versus 1,000. There's no comparison.
Dude, you're absolutely right. Your Moroccan friend hit it on the head. Yeah. I mean, when our elders came here, they did what they were supposed to do. They built our masajid. They built out the infrastructure. They built the schools. They built the cemeteries. They established Zabiha. They made the necessary engagement contacts to hold large Eid celebrations, but they did what they were supposed to do. Yeah. Our generation's job is going to be create all of those relationships to work hand in hand with the African-American Muslim community so we can have some, so we can do some data sharing and knowledge sharing.
Right.
And we can piggyback off one another to take our community now to the next step. I think there's a lot of hate on where our elders were, especially by people in our generation, people younger than us. But man, they did everything they were supposed to do.
They did. And I think I realized how hard it was just to leave. Like my parents were from Bangladesh, right? Until I went back to Bangladesh myself as an adult, did I realize how hard it was for my dad to get out of Bangladesh. Like you got to be in the top 1 or 0.5%. Right. And the way you take these exams, and it's like, you got to be like top 5 in the country to have a shot or something. Right. It's absurd. Like if we worked half as hard as they did, we'd be in a completely different situation.
Man,
you know what I'm saying?
Different.
So
what it must have been like to come here and raise $100,000.
Yeah.
Did they ever even see $100,000 in their lands?
Right.
Just to secure property.
Right.
In this white country that's got nothing but setbacks for them.
Well, it's like perspective too. My wife, I remember like we always talk about we like, when we're not quarantined, we usually go with the girls. We'll go to breakfast maybe like once a month, like maybe twice a month, and we're paying $50 for a breakfast, right? My parents never did that.
Never.
You know what I'm saying? Because I remember my dad was living off like post his like graduate stipend as a graduate student, right? When we were young, and for my birthday, you get like Pizza Hut like once a year.
Oh yeah, hairspray and soccer ball ones.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So it's like this perspective that you're like, man, like, and are we just like right? Like Ibn Khaldun has this theory, this whole philosophy of like how generations, how our immigrant parents got us here, and then are we just gonna slack off and just chill? You know what I'm saying? I think that's a question. So what's the future for a minute? Like so it seems like you've been doing this outreach work. You're on Facebook and people can see the kind of engagement. And I would say that's what the quarantine's helped you in that sense, because I assume your programming before was like local in Houston in like physical spaces, which has its own benefit. But now everybody who's not in Houston can see what you're doing with the panels you're holding.
We have requests from rabbis and pastors from all over. When are we going to be on your program?
From all over, even beyond Houston.
I'm talking about outside of Houston as well.
Right.
I think Corona has been nice in that we've been able to secure guest presentations and have conversations we would have otherwise never been able to have, because it doesn't require a lot of time commitment to open up your computer and jump on a Zoom call. So we're able to create a lot of content for the Muslim community that we do on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So on Tuesdays, generally speaking, we have an interfaith conversation. On Thursdays, it's a civic engagement conversation. So prior to this, I was telling you, today we had a conversation with NAACP, a city councilwoman, a district attorney who's been just a huge ally to the Muslim community, and just an ally to minorities all over. And then someone from the Waradeen community talking about guilty until proven innocent, the economic and social justice framework that keeps they keep screwing over our brothers and sisters of color. It's such an important conversation that we have to continue having in the Muslim community. But we're also getting Congresswoman Holland from Albuquerque, I think Congressional District number 2 in New Mexico, to talk about what's going on with our friends in the Indigenous American community. Did you know, Maheen, that the Navajo, the Cherokee, the Apache, the Choctaw, they haven't received a dime of the CARES Act? Nothing.
What?
Nothing at all. And by the way, perpetually underfunded medical system. The Indian medical system is a perpetually underfunded and corrupt system, right? There's just no, the mortality rate of Native Americans is already so high. And now because of Corona, it's crazy. And no one's talking about it. And so we've seen it on CNN, MSNBC, but it's just become this news cycle. And why, Mahina, I don't know how it was like. What country, what state did you grow up in? Ohio or Tennessee?
Ohio.
Did you guys do a lot of focus on Native Americans?
We did, I remember in middle school, we took like Ohio history that was like really boring.
Yeah, you know what?
Because like when you learn about the mounds, the Native American mounds, like city, the tribe of Miami, Ohio, Miami University is named after. Yeah, so there was definitely a strong Native American presence there.
You have a Miami University in Ohio?
Yeah.
Wow, that's random.
Yeah, the city, it's called Miami. It's called Miami of Ohio. Ben Roethlisberger plays for the Steelers. He played quarterback at Miami.
I don't know who that is.
He's an NFL player. He's a quarterback.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
I don't watch much sports.
Yeah.
I just lost credibility with the whole portion of your audience. My bad. Drop me a line if you're angry about me at that as well.
No, you're not this first guy. I ended up the guy I had on like Saturday night. Like I was telling him about I was wearing a Golden State Warriors hat because he's from the Bay Area, and he was like, I was like trying to show him some love, and I was gonna wear an Astros hat for you, but it didn't match my T-shirt.
Oh, okay.
So, maybe next time I'll wear. I have an Akeem Olajuwon jersey that I'll wear next time.
Oh, there you go. See, I know that one.
Yeah,
I know that one.
But
awesome. But what I was saying, so here in Houston,
yeah,
in the Texas educational system, we learn about the Trail of Tears and going over Native American rights and what happened to them. It was just a travesty. And then you grow up with movies like Dances with Wolves and all these other movies that talk about the plight of Native Americans. And then we all look at it as a history lesson. It is not a history lesson. Mm-hmm. It's the way that our country treats Indigenous Americans is an absolute travesty. Going from not just that pipeline project, going through their native sacred burial grounds. It's like someone telling us, hey, you're the Muslim cemetery, by the way, we're gonna rip it up and we're gonna drive an oil pipeline through it. You don't think every auntie and uncle all of a sudden will be activated and they'll become activated protesters and petition? Everyone's gonna be doing a change.org petition. But it's crazy the types of rights that they don't have. Because we're in Houston and there's no reservations around here, we don't talk about it often, but it's important for the Muslim or the American Muslim community to understand what happens with other minorities because, you know what? I'm going to pull a quote from Bishop Dixon from the NAACP today. It was from the webinar that we were on, Guilty Until Proven Innocent. He said something that to me that just riveted in my heart. He said, if my pain doesn't concern you, then to me that says my humanity doesn't matter to you. Mm-hmm. And that was beautiful. It was profound. And he was talking about why people should care about African-American civil rights. He said, if my pain doesn't concern you, then to me that makes me feel as if my humanity doesn't matter to you. In so many ways, it's just absolutely spot on because unfortunately as Muslims, we end up focusing on issues that are over there.
Yeah.
Even as second generation Muslims, it's somehow, we're not even from back over there, we're from over here, but we've internalized the struggles or the passions of our parents instead of looking at the literacy rates in our own neighborhoods, the youth imprisonment rates in our own neighborhoods, what's happening to Native Americans, African Americans. It's just, I think as second generation and third generation Muslim Americans, especially who come from immigrant lineages, we have to recenter and refocus our priorities. Syria is a huge issue that we have to focus on. Palestine is a huge issue. Chechnya, Sudan, Mali, those are very important, but they do not replace our own brothers and sisters next door to us.
You know, I think that the mindset, we're still like super immature when it comes to this kind of stuff, because for Mad Mamluks, we did a podcast a couple years back. One of my friends, Yusuf, he spent like, I think 2 weeks at up there, North Dakota, the DAPL. You know, he was there, like he was on the front lines. He's a dentist, so he took time off work. He went out there and everything, and he was talking about experience at the Mad Mamluk show that's still available. You guys can check out. But interestingly, we had some really weird, like repulsive comments coming from Muslims after that show. Like people saying, well, you know, the natives, they're like animists and they believe in like weird spirits and pagans. And, you know, at least the people who like took their lands are Christians or Ahlul Kitab. And I was like, I never heard, but like, man, but there's like some serious like sickness of the heart going on.
Man, I just vomited in my mouth a little bit, man.
You know what I'm saying? Like literally those kind of comments came through. And sometimes some people said it in a joking manner, but you know what you realize is that like if you're gonna joke about stuff, you can't even joke about that. Like that's honestly off limits. You know, people say that like because definitely not, because like this whole thing, the Trump era has breeded like this kind of thing where like nothing's sacred. You can talk about anything. Right, you can be a troll, and if you're being offended, then you don't have a thick skin. But like, you know, there's red lines, man, and people are like, and we tend to be sometimes too loosey goosey about that, right?
100%.
You know what I'm saying? And under the guise of and whenever somebody asks us about it, we're like, oh well, they're disbelievers. You know, why should we care? And that is like, I think essentially. I've been guilty of it. I'll be frank. I've been guilty of probably some things like that in the past myself. But when you look into it, it's like even Allah tells us in the Quran that we are not to insult people. We're not to like speak pejoratively about people in that sense, right? About others, that we come to them with a common word, right? So there's, you know, and I think that's just like, and we like to just say whatever we'll like to say whatever, and then we'll be like, oh, but they're not even Muslim, so why should we care? And the mindset says a lot. And I think that's like, you think that you're neglecting them, you're really neglecting yourself. You're repressing yourself.
You know, I think this is going to change with their generation, our kids' generation. It's just going to change because we still have baggage from the immigrant generation.
Right.
It's change with the next generation. It's going to take a couple of generations for this just to go away, and for I think the majority Native American, African American, Latino community to really see strong allies in our community. But it's going to be our job to build those relationships and for our kids to take it to an entirely different level.
Exactly.
Standing up for one another is not just a left-wing liberal thing. That's a total Muslim thing. We see this so often from the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he stood up for Muslims and non-Muslims, not Ahl Kitab, but people who worship so many other deities other than Allah. He stood up for them.
Right.
It's just an example for ourselves from the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him, that we as Muslims have to do a better job of standing up for one another, even if we don't see eye to eye.
Exactly. As we wrap up here, what's in the future for Minaret Foundation? What do you have in the pipeline coming through?
Oh, man.
I hadn't thought about that yet.
Huh?
Or right now, it's just like you're in the zone of creating this content. We like 2 like panels a week on Zoom. It's working for you. So like, just try to keep it up for now. Is that kind of what the?
We want to keep up the momentum.
Yeah.
We've identified a project that is going to be so. You know how everyone talks about how AIPAC gets congressional leaders to go to Israel, and mayors and governors, and has such an enormous influence on American politics. I don't necessarily believe that to be true. I think there's other organizations which have a focus on Israel and other countries that have more of an impact. But let's say, for instance, APAC has the biggest impact. Just that program in and of itself is something that I think the Muslim community has always wondered and asked, how can we do the same? How can we showcase the Muslim community overseas? We have an answer for it in a project that really competes with it, but also takes it to an entirely different level. It'll benefit the Muslim community. Without giving away too much, that's something that we're working on right now. It's really juicy. It's something that's going to launch hopefully by September, inshallah. And we already have commitments from several congressional leaders, county leaders, and some state leaders to participate in as well as a trial project. And I think that's going to become a model for Houstonians, hopefully Texans, and hopefully American Muslims overall, and how we can engage our elected officials with that travel component.
And man, look forward to that. And where can people engage with you and your organization? Like social media, it seems like Facebook seems the spot right now for you guys.
Yeah, Facebook. Yeah, please check out our Facebook, follow us or like us. It's facebook.com/Minaret Foundation. Catch us on online at minaretfoundation.com. Sign up to our email list, learn more about what we're doing. Check it out. If you want to implement any of the programs or projects in your city, drop us a line. More than happy to help you out. Replicate it, modify it, put your own branding, own name on it. You don't even have to tell us what's going on. You don't even have to put our logo or credit us. Just do the work. That's all we care about. Reach out to us on Instagram. I may have said a bunch of things here that you don't agree with. Reach out to me at my email address at shariq@minaretfoundation.com. Hate on me. Let's have a conversation, talk about my views and perspectives. Maybe my views and perspectives will change as well. But the last thing that I want to mention before we head out is that the only way the situation of the Muslims in this country is going to change is if we take the first step and engage the quote-unquote other. We have to remember that hate and prejudice has sometimes been handed to people on a silver platter from the pulpit, from radio stations, from even the president's office. And it's just so juicy and it makes sense and it fits the narrative that we've been raised with. And sometimes people are going through difficulties and this hate and prejudice just fits in with the perfect puzzle, as a perfect puzzle piece, because they find a way out, someone to blame other than themselves. And we have to realize as Muslims, that is our job to inform people about who we are. So we can't just sit back and say they're ignorant, they're KKK, they're this, they're that, because what we're doing is creating a class of the other and creating distance from ourselves and them and creating an excuse for us not to engage. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ never did that. He never created distance from the other. My ask of your viewers is this: engage people who are strangers, engage people who differ with you, engage people who are at the polar end or the polar opposite of you, and engage them with the idea of that all you're trying to do is represent Islam and be an ambassador to Islam. And when I say engage, I don't say, do you know who I am as a Muslim? It's, hey, what's going on? What's cooking for today? What's for dinner today? And just creating conversation and allowing your Islam, allowing your Iman to just shine through in your everyday conversations with them. But it's going to be our job to talk to people outside of our community. We cannot expect anyone else to talk to us, right? Because we have been instructed, invite to the way of your Lord with wisdom, good instruction, and debate or argue or exchange in a way that is best. It's our job, not anyone else's. So go out there and engage.
That was awesome, man. Great closeout for our listeners and viewers out there. You can subscribe to us. We're on YouTube now, Sultans and Sneakers. I'm on the various podcast apps. This show will be up in audio form as well in a few weeks of time. I keep saying that, but I feel like I get lazy once I put the video up. I'm like, man, it's out there. Like I'll get to the audio when I get to it. But a lot of folks, I'm loyal to the audio platform, to be honest. Like that's the bread and butter of a podcast, not YouTube, not video, but audio really. Yeah, and you can email me with any questions or comments or concerns at info@sultanssneakers.com. I'm on Twitter. I'm on TikTok now. Anything out there, we'll try to engage people on. And then For our special guest, Shariq Abdul Ghani from the Minaret Foundation, this is your host, Maheen Islam, signing off for Sultans and Stickers. Take it easy. Stop my screen.